The president of Ukraine will land in Evian in about 55 minutes. But yes, Iran is really the focus and really certainly was the focus of leaders and conversations on day one of this summit. The question for the Europeans, as you alluded to, is to really find out the level of detail, because at this point we know that there is a framework deal to end the war, but nobody has seen the actual wording. This memorandum has not been made public, and the fine print remains very much a mystery to global leaders, but also within some sectors of the U.S. Yesterday, nonetheless, the President Donald Trump insisted that this is a good deal that will put an end to Iran's nuclear program. He also said that the Strait of Hormuz, this is vital for the global energy market, will be, quote, fully reopened by Friday, and that ceremony will go ahead. Donald Trump will not participate in that ceremony in Switzerland. It will be the vice president who heads over to Europe to sign it and formalize him. Some suggesting perhaps that the president does not want to be associated too closely with the deal in case it flops. But of course, at this stage, that is political speculation. Nonetheless, there are real questions around this agreement, because U.S. officials briefed reporters here in the G7 in Evian, saying that in principle, yes, the Strait of Hormuz should be fully reopened by Friday, but practically and operationally that could take weeks, because the strait has been shut now for more than or close to 4 months, and that is going to take more time. There's also a major question around the sanctions. What is in this deal? The president of the U.S. said yesterday that any relief will be, quote, dependent on their behavior. The vice president also repeated that message, saying that a lot will depend on whether or not Iran can behave like a, quote, normal country. The Europeans yesterday repeated that they will not ease any sanctions until they see real change on the ground. But a lot of those questions heavily depend on the text of that memorandum of understanding between the two countries. For the time being, as I say, it has not been released. That is a fundamental key point we should stress. The U.S. administration says it should come out this week. So the question is still in the air, and it remains, is this a good deal? That is a question that I put to the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, John Bolton, yesterday on Special Report on Euronews. Let's take a look.
No, I think it's a very bad deal for the United States. Trump isn't thinking about the geostrategic implications of the deal. He's thinking of one thing. He wants the strait opened. He wants Gulf oil on international markets. He wants the price of gasoline at the pump down. That's all he cares about. I think it's a mistake to give this brutal theocracy any of the assets. I'm happy to give the assets back to Iran when it's under a free government. That's not where we are now. The change of leadership is only because we've killed the top 400 or 500 people in the existing regime, and you're down now to their seconds and deputies. So, yeah, it's different people, but it's the same fanatic regime. Trump is desperate for a deal. He's desperate for a deal, and they have maneuvered him. They've played him like a violin. That's why they've got the deal that they want.
And that is, of course, John Bolton speaking to Euronews, saying that this is a deal with one goal in mind, and that is to bring down oil prices. And he is not wrong to some extent, because the U.S. president also doubled down on that message, repeating that oil prices will come down and the stock market is up because of this deal. But as I say, two fundamental questions in terms of the sanctions, but also the program, the nuclear enrichment program. Who is going to monitor that it is dismantled? The other piece of breaking news that I want to give to you now live is the president of the U.S. has also put out a statement on Social Truth, his social media, saying that any reports that the U.S. will pay $300 billion to reconstruct Iran is, quote, fake news. But this goes back again to some of the questions around the wording in this deal, because it seems, however, that in the text there will be a reference to countries wanting to invest in Iran, which has been heavily bombed for 3 months. But the U.S. president repeating this morning, not a single cent of U.S. money will go into Iran. But as I mentioned, major questions around the fine print of this deal, which for the time being, nobody has seen.
And Maria, as you said, President Zelensky arriving imminently. Will President Trump play ball there?
Well, that's another big question. And Maeve, yesterday, the president of the U.S. said that with Iran now, quote, done, he will focus on Ukraine. The Ukrainian president is expected to land here, as I say, in 55 minutes. I asked a member of his cabinet, President Zelensky, whether the Ukrainians still believe a bilateral meeting is still possible. And this official told me, quote, sure, it is still possible. And I should also update you now with some comments from the office of the president of Ukraine, saying that President Zelensky will have, for the time being, bilateral meetings with the German chancellor, of course, with the French president, the head of the IMF, the UK prime minister, and the Canadian prime minister. But the big question is whether or not there will be that one-to-one with President Trump, who yesterday seemed to indicate that now he will have the time to focus back on Ukraine. For the Ukrainians, the goal will now be to step up pressure on Russia and to take a hard line on Russia in these negotiations. Also, a cryptic message from President Zelensky yesterday, who said that an invitation had been extended to Vladimir Putin, but he decided not to show up. Unclear who extended the invitation.